Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter for boxing-related tweets, or you can subscribe to the channel and get notifications whenever a new video is uploaded. I want to talk about boxing, obviously, but before I do, I want to draw your attention to a little monologue from Majid Nawaz, who is a journalist on LBC, which is a radio station here in the UK, where he starts off rather cowardly, in my opinion, appeasing those that are calling for an improperly tested, and I'm just going to do that rather than say any words that are going to flash up on an algorithm here on YouTube. But he starts off like that, but then he goes into discussing the science of the reason you're under house arrest. And I've spoken before on my own Twitter account at ChrisAndre6, the various scientific elements of what is occurring at the moment and how that data is manipulated and so on and so forth. Well, he makes a pretty impassioned plea for people to wake up, and he speaks about why. And it's a very, very good little monologue. I suggest you check it out. I'm going to put it in the description box of this video. Moving on to boxing specifically, I want to talk about Andre Ward and his comments about Vasyl Lomachenko, as well as the fact that there isn't a clamour for a rematch from those outside of Team Lomachenko. And I want to talk about why that is, because I'm not just talking about Teofimo Lopez and his team, by the way. We'll talk about this. We'll discuss all of this. First and foremost, Kriegal, the reporter in the United States, basically came out and said that Lomachenko dared to be great. He went too far in weight categories, fought a guy that was too big, ended up falling short, and that was that. And Andre Ward strongly disagreed and said, no, you can't be giving a guy who's supposedly all that, he says, all these props, and then all of a sudden give him a pass, essentially, is what he's implying, by saying he's not big enough to be at the weight. That's not really what Kriegal was doing, but what Ward is essentially arguing is that you have to judge him as though he's a lightweight, because as long as you operate at that weight category, you have to be treated as though you are natural at that weight category. So while I applaud him, he said, for taking the fight, you can't say that, he was a smaller guy. You just can't bring it into the equation. Well, I have to strongly disagree with Andre Ward. Not necessarily about this fight, because unlike other analysts, I don't necessarily feel that Teofimo Lopez is too big for Loma. He's bigger, and it plays a role for sure. But I don't think Loma's hit that ceiling yet. I still believe Loma's the best in the division. I believe that Loma would win the rematch. I believe he could even potentially stop Lopez in the rematch. He buzzed him a couple of times. I do think if he takes more of a risk, he could also potentially get stopped himself. Just like Chocolatito started to become more aggressive against Rungvisai in the rematch, he ended up getting stopped, okay? I wouldn't be stunned if that happened to Loma, but if I had to bet on it, I believe he wins the fight, probably on points. I wouldn't be surprised if he got a stoppage. I wouldn't also be surprised if he got stopped. But I still think Loma is the best in the division. I think if he beats Lopez, he then goes on to beat Tank and Haney and Garcia and anybody else in the division. But I'm going to talk about why there isn't a clamour for a rematch in the boxing press, and also from the promotional teams involved here. Okay, I'm going to get a bit conspiratorial with all that. We'll get to that in a second. First, let's discuss Andre Ward's comments. I'm not so sure I agree with that, because size does matter, okay? I know, a lot of people want to believe in this idea of if you're a skilled fighter, you can always overcome all physical obstacles. That's not true. Size matters. If Floyd Mayweather was to go up to heavyweight and fight, I don't know, say someone who's considered to be a failed heavyweight, someone like Audley Harrison, if he goes and gets knocked out, does that mean Audley's better than Floyd Mayweather? If Canelo Alvarez decides now, I'm going to go up to cruiserweight and I'm going to fight Briedis, and he loses, does that mean he's been exposed? Or that his pound for pound rating should be decreased? Should he lose that pound for pound number one spot? Now, the question is, how far do you have to go up before people would give you a pass? I don't think Loma has gone high up enough for me to say, okay, he lost because of size alone. But it plays a role, for sure. And I don't believe that Teofimo Lopez is anywhere near as skilled as Lomachenko. So there's enough of a size gap there to have played a significant role in the result of this fight. Having said that, this idea that once you compete at a weight class, you should be judged as being from that weight class is a bit of it's short-sighted in my opinion. Andre Ward himself spoke often about going up to heavyweight and competing. If he'd gone up to heavyweight and he fought one of the kings of the heavyweight division and got stopped, would that make him any less of a fighter? Would that lower his pound for pound position? I'm not so sure. I don't think it, in fact, no, let me rephrase. I'm not saying I'm not so sure. I'm saying no, it shouldn't affect a guy's reputation or the ability. It wouldn't mean if Andre Ward went up to heavyweight and he got stopped by a mediocre sort of gatekeeping level heavyweight, a Kaznowski, for instance, or even someone more proven than that, like a Chisora, who's nowhere near the level of skill set of Andre Ward, but he's just a lot bigger and he was able to club Andre to death and he knocked him out. That doesn't mean that Andre Ward should be lowered in the estimation of people's eyes. So at what point do you say, right, this guy's gone high up enough whereby whatever he does from this point forth, I don't judge him, but prior to that, he needs to be getting these results or it will affect the way I see him. Andre Ward says in this interview that he feels as though if he'd won the fight, nobody would say he was a smaller guy. Well, obviously not, because it's about overcoming an obstacle. But it still plays a role. There has to come a point where skill set is offset by size. If any of you guys out there that have ever sparred or fought, if you've ever been up there against a guy who's significantly bigger than you, you might be surprised as to how well you start. Because, in that first round or two, you've got the speed advantage. You're more mobile. You're landing shots and you're getting out again. And he's not landing shots and you're thinking, I'm doing all right here. As you begin to tire and you're not as evasive and elusive and he starts to lean on you and he starts to target your body and that's when the weight and size really plays a role. All of a sudden, you're not fainting and closing that range as quickly as you were before. You're getting caught on your way in. And when you are getting in, all of a sudden, you're the one feeling that physical disadvantage. Okay, it plays a role. The weight categories exist for a reason. Okay. Max Kellerman once said, post Pacquiao losing to Floyd, that Pacquiao was the better pound for pound fighter. And people responded to that saying, what are you talking about? Floyd schooled him. Floyd proved he's the best of the generation. Regardless of where you sit on that debate, because that's a whole other debate. Okay. Regardless, what Max was saying, again, whether you agree or not, he said if they were the same size, Pacquiao wins the fight. So he's trying to say the reason Floyd won is because of the size and reach advantage, and Pacquiao wasn't able to bridge that gap with any skill set he might have had. Now, many people will say, but Pacquiao was established at that weight long enough for it not to matter at all. Other people would say, well, there were still certain physical advantages and disadvantages. So I'm asking, not just with regards to those two, but generally speaking, how many weight categories do you have to go through before you start giving a guy a pass, or before you start judging him saying you need to conquer this division if you're all that they say that you are? Now, when you look at certain fighters that do well going through weight categories, what tends to happen is that there are certain physical attributes which are at play. First and foremost, tall fighters. There's something Keith Thurman has spoken about in the past. Tall fighters can grow into a frame. And the reason that's important is because they don't have a significant reach disadvantage. Okay, it's when you start to have a reach disadvantage that it really begins to affect you. And we'll get back to that in a moment. The other potential is the style of fighter that you are. If you are very elusive and fast with your feet and upper body movements, that you're not getting punished on your way in, and you are able to land a big, powerful shots on your power carries as you go through the weight categories, you can change the trajectory of a fight by being elusive and landing your big shots. Think David Haye against Nikolai Valuev. Even that has a limitation though. When he came up against Vladimir Klitschko, don't believe this idea that Vlad is just some robotic guy that can't move. That's just not true. He might not be as evasive and elusive as a Tyson Fury, but he can move, believe me. He's fluid. Vlad can move. So as Haye was trying to come inside, launching those shots from outside, Vlad would throw that big strong arm defense, get behind that shoulder and step back. And the right hand would come wide and land on that arm as he's stepping away diagonally, and he'd always be out of range. Haye would try and close the range. Vlad would react. He's always out of range. On the occasion where Haye would be quick enough to get inside, Vlad would tie him up, lean on him. Haye was trying to fall to the floor on purpose, I thought, at times, to try and get the referee to tell Vlad stop doing that. But the point is, on the inside, there was a physical mismatch. And at range, he couldn't close the range quickly enough to land his shots and get out. So even when you had all the required attributes, he still couldn't overcome over 12 rounds those physical disadvantages against a man of Vlad's caliber. Now, he was able to do it against guys like Derek Chisora and so on and so forth because there isn't that height and reach advantage. It goes back to the height issue. It's that issue of, can I get inside consistently? Can I still do my work? Or do I have to go and sit on a guy's chest? Well, if I've got to go and sit on a guy's chest and he's bigger than me, then I've got a serious problem. Okay? So that's where physical attributes play a big part in this. So I basically just want to know at what point you start to say, right, he's moved through 2 categories. From now on, whatever he does is, I'm not going to judge him. Or is it 3 categories, 4 categories, 5? Obviously, there are smaller jumps in the smaller weight categories, but, it's easier to put on a stone if you're 15 stone to 16 stone than it is to put on a stone if you're a lightweight and you're trying to move up through weight categories. So is it all relative? Does one category lower down the ranks equate to the same as one category in the heavier echelons? You guys let me know. The other thing, though, that I find interesting is the fact that there's a lack of a clamour for a rematch. If Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, a unification match, whoever loses, whatever happens in that first fight between them, it could end in 1 round. There are going to be people going to be screaming for a rematch, so we can be sure. Why isn't that happening with Lomachenko? It's not like he got battered. It's not like he got outclassed. He started slowly, maybe because he made tactical errors in terms of how he approached the fight, or maybe Lopez was just very good at timing him, really good with the body work, really good at keeping him at distance, and Loma took time to find keys, find solutions to those problems. Whatever the case might be, Loma didn't get battered. So at what point do we say, this is so comprehensive, I don't want to see the rematch? We're nowhere near that point. So why isn't there this comprehensive clamour to see a rematch? With any other unification match, you would see a rematch. Or you'd see, especially when it's the pound-for-pound #1 guy that's been upset. That's the time when people are going to say, whoa, I need to be sure that this was genuine and not just an off night. And yet we're not seeing it. Loma's calling for a rematch. Teofimo Lopez keeps saying, why should I have a rematch? I can understand his position. Why should he give up the rematch? He says he wouldn't have given me a rematch if I lost. And he's in a good position. Now, deep down, to me, that suggests he doesn't feel like he can, or he's not guaranteed to win the rematch. He might have seen something in the second half of that fight where he thought, you know what, I'm better suited going another route here. Or maybe it's just the principle of it, thinking he wouldn't have given me a rematch. So I'm not holding anything against Teofimo Lopez here. But it's unusual that the boxing press aren't jumping on this and saying, we need to see a rematch. We need to have a conclusive finish to this rivalry. So let's consider why. I'm going to get a little bit conspiratorial here. The promoter, Bob Arum, who does he benefit from coming out on top here? What's more beneficial? I would venture to suggest that it's more beneficial if Teofimo Lopez comes out on top of this rivalry. Think about the amount of money that can be made from having guys like Tank, Haney, Garcia, and of course Teofimo Lopez. 4 American guys go up against each other. Think about that. Think about the rivalries. How many pay-per-views? The bad-mouthing, the trash talking, without having to worry about what's lost in translation. Different guys, different states, different parts of the US, different styles of fighters. It's a promoter's dream, right? Whereas if Lomachenko goes and beats Teofimo Lopez, and in my opinion, I still think he's the best in the division. If he then goes and beats the other guys and he cleans out the division, how much money are they going to really generate from those remaining fights? I'm not so sure it's going to be as much. And bear in mind, I'm not saying he would necessarily clean out the division. He'd have a chance to, but I'm just trying to put out the point of, in terms of big money fights, long term, they'll probably build up the 4 Americans fighting each other a lot more effectively than Loma. And this might also be the reason that the American press aren't giving Kambosos as much of a bigging up as well, which is unusual since he started to base himself in the United States. Is it because 4 American fighters, prospects, well, they're beyond prospects now, but 4 big American names will provide much bigger excitement in terms of pay-per-view than an Australian fighter and a Ukrainian fighter? Let me know what you think about that, guys. In terms of the press, why wouldn't the boxing press do this? I can understand why the channels wouldn't big it up because there's a conflict of interest. I could understand why potentially a promoter wouldn't do it because of a conflict of interest financially. But I remember once the Boxing Voice saying that they were denied access to a certain interview of a certain fighter because the promoter was unhappy with critique of a specific fighter in the past. I also remember IFL TV, Kugan Cassius being denied access to the Vladimir Klitschko Fury fight, because Team Klitschko didn't feel as though they were fair in their reporting. They felt that they were too pro-Fury. So do we see a scenario here whereby the media are afraid to start calling for this and saying, listen, we need to see this rematch because they're afraid of potential consequences? And then what does that say about the wider question of the fact that promoters are involved in picking judges and stuff too? Let me know what you think, guys. Why isn't there this clamour for a rematch? It strikes me as very unusual that the pound for pound number one fighter in the world could lose what was a close, fairly close, but, you know, I'm not questioning. I felt Lopez won the fight for sure. I'm not saying it was controversial, but it was a fairly close fight where it's not like one guy battered the other. And the pound for pound number one fighter in the world lost. And there isn't this constant call for a rematch. Why? Let me know what you guys think about Andre Ward's comments. Should it affect the perception rather, of Lomachenko? And should there be a definite call for a rematch? What is going on? Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. God bless.